James stood at the foot of the ICU bed, staring at his wife, Emily, whose face was pale and fragile under the dim hospital lights. The machines beeped steadily, their monotonous rhythm the only sign of life in her still body. It had been 3 months since the aneurysm, and the doctors had warned him. She may never wake up. But today, James wasn't here to cling to hope or hold her hand. Today, he was here to say goodbye, not just to the woman he once loved, but to the life they had shared. And as his phone buzzed in his pocket with a message from Sophie, his secretary, James knew the choice he'd already made. Emily had been the heart of everything James once cherished. They met in college, fell in love young, and built a life together that was filled with dreams, laughter, and adventure. Emily, an artist, had a spirit that was impossible to contain. Her paintings filled their home with vibrant colors, and she lived with a passion that matched the intensity of her work. James had always admired that about her, even if he sometimes found himself standing in her shadow. 3 months ago, everything changed. Emily collapsed suddenly in her art studio, the result of a brain aneurysm that no one had seen coming. She was rushed to the hospital, but by the time James arrived, she had already slipped into a coma. The doctors did what they could, but the damage was severe. They told him that her chances of waking up were slim, and even if she did, there was no telling what kind of condition she would be in. At first, James had done everything a devoted husband was supposed to do. He visited her every day, holding her hand, talking to her even though she couldn't respond. He told her stories, reminded her of the life they had built, and promised her that he would be there when she woke up. But as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, something inside James began to shift. It wasn't long before Sophie entered his life in a new way. Sophie had been his secretary at the firm for the past year. She was young, bright, and energetic, a stark contrast to the lifeless routine James had fallen into. At first, it was just small talk. She would ask about Emily, offer a sympathetic ear. But over time, something changed. James found himself looking forward to seeing her, to escaping the overwhelming grief of his situation by losing himself in her easy laughter and carefree attitude. One late evening, after too many drinks following a particularly hard day at the hospital, things between James and Sophie crossed the line. What started as an innocent conversation turned into a kiss, and before he knew it, he was in her arms. The guilt gnawed at him, but the truth was undeniable. Sophie was offering him something Emily couldn't anymore. Life. Escape. A fresh start. James convinced himself that Emily was never going to wake up. Every day that she remained in that coma was a reminder that their life together was over. He began to distance himself from the hospital, skipping visits, making excuses to himself, and instead spending more and more time with Sophie. Eventually, Sophie became more than just an escape. She became his reality. What James didn't know was that Emily was still there, trapped within her own body. Though she couldn't move, couldn't speak, Emily was fully aware of her surroundings. She could hear the voices of the doctors, feel the soft touch of the nurses as they adjusted her position or changed her bandages. Most of all, she felt the absence of the man she loved. At first, she waited. She could hear James when he visited, feel the warmth of his hand in hers, and his voice was like a lifeline pulling her out of the darkness. But slowly, the visits became less frequent, his voice more distant, until one day, he simply stopped coming. In the dark fog of her mind, Emily began to feel a different kind of pain, a deep, emotional ache that came from knowing the man she had given her life to was no longer fighting for her. The awakening. One day, a few weeks after James stopped visiting, something inside Emily began to stir. A faint spark, like a flicker of light in the darkest part of her mind, began to grow. Her body was weak, but her spirit was still strong, and she wasn't ready to give up. Slowly, painfully, she fought to pull herself out of the coma that had kept her trapped for so long. It started with small movements, her fingers twitching, her eyelids fluttering, but the nurses noticed immediately. The doctors were astonished when Emily's eyes opened fully one morning. She had beaten the odds, defying every grim prognosis they had given. But her recovery wasn't easy. Emily had to relearn how to move, speak, and function on her own. The road was long, but she was determined. She fought through the pain, pushing herself harder than anyone expected. All the while, one question burned in her mind. Where was James? Once Emily had regained her ability to speak, her first question was simple. Where's James? Her sister, Claire, who had been by her side through the entire ordeal, hesitated. The truth was a bitter pill to swallow, and Claire wasn't sure how Emily would handle it in her fragile state. Emily, Claire said carefully, James hasn't been here in a while. How long? Emily's voice was quiet, but there was a sharp edge to her question. A few weeks, Claire admitted. There's more. He's been seeing someone else. The words hit Emily like a punch to the gut. She had been fighting for her life, and the man she had loved, had trusted, had walked away from her. Worse, he had betrayed her with Sophie, the secretary she had once thought of as nothing more than an office acquaintance. Once Emily was strong enough, she asked Claire to take her home. She needed to see James, to confront him, to understand why he had left her when she needed him the most. The house, their home, felt like a stranger to her when she returned. It was filled with memories, but those memories were tainted now, stained by betrayal. When James came home from work that evening, he was shocked to see Emily sitting in their living room, her eyes filled with a fire he hadn't expected. You're awake, he said, his voice filled with disbelief. I'm awake, Emily replied, her tone cold. And I know. James's face paled. Know what? About you and Sophie, Emily said, her voice breaking slightly. You abandoned me. I was fighting for my life, and you gave up on me. James stumbled over his words, trying to explain, to justify his actions. I didn't think you'd ever wake up. I was lost, Emily. I didn't know what to do. I needed you, Emily said, her voice firm now. And you weren't there. You were with her. For a moment, James said nothing, the weight of his guilt heavy in the air between them. But finally he spoke. I'm sorry, he whispered. I don't know how to fix this. Emily stared at him, her heart aching. But in that moment, she realized something important. She didn't need James to fix anything. She had survived without him. She had fought her way back to life, and she was stronger for it. Over the next few weeks, Emily began to rebuild her life. She poured herself into her art, using the pain of James's betrayal as fuel for her creativity. Her work became more raw, more powerful, and soon, galleries were clamoring to showcase her paintings. Her career, which had been put on hold during her coma, was now thriving. James tried to make amends, but Emily had already moved on in her heart. She realized that the man she had loved was no longer the man she needed. She had found her strength in herself, not in him. One day, as Emily stood in her art studio, painting a vivid canvas filled with emotion, she smiled. She had been through hell, but she had come out the other side stronger, wiser, and free. James may have abandoned her, but she had reclaimed her life, and it was hers to live, on her own terms. Emily had been left for dead, both physically and emotionally, but she had risen above it all. She had awakened not just from her coma, but to a new understanding of herself. She didn't need James or his apologies. She had saved herself, and that was the most satisfying ending of all.